Thank you everyone who is listening in and joining us for this live X. This is the first time we're doing it. A short introduction to myself. My name is Ellen, and I'm the founder of a local Hawaii-based blockchain company called Inoa. But I'm also the Hawaii chapter president for a national grassroots crypto advocacy group called Stand With Crypto. So if you want to learn more about what we do, check it out at www.standwithcrypto.org. But today I'm really excited to have, you know him since you're on his channel, Andrew Chu, the founder of One to All, but also the creator of Whitespace, Meditate and Manifest. Mm-hmm. So when I heard Andrew actually working on this app, I think we reached out, we spoke a little bit, and I was like, this is super cool, because I am the worst meditator. And unfortunately, I'm still really bad at meditation. So we'll try to get there one day. But I have a lot of questions for you for tonight's session. We call it First Fridays, Faces of Crypto, where I kind of talk to people from different fields who are kind of leveraging blockchain technology, and in your case, AI as well, and having that intersection with something that, we may not necessarily anticipate, right? Yeah. So in this case today, it's going to be meditation, mental wellness as well, which is super cool. So let's get into it. Sure. Whole list of questions, and then after that, we're going to open it up to the floor for questions for the people in the room, and even like online
X. If we can get that to work.
If you have questions, maybe you can whip out your app later and
see. If folks want to leave questions, we'll come back to it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, okay, so almost 20 plus years across fintech, product, technology. And when we first met, I was like, oh, my fellow techie and builder. What specific moment or gap you noticed in the space that led you to build Whitespace, right? And before you go into that, maybe just, for people who are not familiar with what that is, just a short kind of spiel of what Whitespace is first.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. So firstly, Whitespace is, I guess most simply put, it's a meditation app, but it's a highly personalized meditation app, which I think makes it somewhat unique. And I guess in terms of and we'll get into the personalization side of it and all that, but I think in terms of the origin story of it, it's definitely correlated. Kind of a silly reason, honestly, firstly, why I started messing around with the concept. I actually like to pick up basketball. Okay. It'll all make sense in a couple of minutes, but I actually like to play pickup basketball every week or so with this a group of guys here in Honolulu. And it's kind of a silly thing for me, but I actually enjoy it a lot. It's one of the things that I really, really enjoy. And it just kind of occurred to me one day, I was like, I wonder if there's a way to get better just by doing some of these either meditations, like a guided meditation or something that just do an affirmation almost too, of visualizing myself playing better or just things going more smoothly on the court or whatever, right? And so that's kind of honestly how it started, as a very very niche, very, very niche reason or intention. And but that led me down a very, very deep rabbit hole because, I started just looking around, honestly. And part of this is just my background in terms of, I've always been interested in meditation. I was talking to Z, who's in the audience earlier. One of the things that my wife and I did really early on was we went on a retreat to Houston. We went to a meditation center. And that case was a Taoist meditation center. And that was maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years. Okay. Time flies. Not good with numbers. My wife corrected me. So, but so all along the way, I've kind of dabbled. So I think partially it was for this very kind of niche, interest of mine, but also more broadly, I was just curious, what's the state of things for meditation and meditation apps. And so that led me down a really, really deep rabbit hole. I basically just went on a complete binge, downloaded practically every meditation app available, at least the top 10 or something like that. And for people who are familiar with the space, the top two that are most commonly mentioned are Calm and Headspace. So definitely use those. But also Insight Timer is kind of usually the close third. and then so on and so forth. And I mean, long story short, basically what I found was that all the meditation apps today, by and large, still follow kind of like a almost like a Netflix or a Spotify type model, where they have huge libraries of tracks, 200,000, 300,000 or more, but it can be kind of cumbersome to try to find something that you're looking for. Particularly in my case, which again was admittedly very, very niche. I wasn't super hopeful that I actually find something, and not surprisingly, there was not a whole lot of like, middle-aged Asian guy like pick up basketball affirmations and whatnot. So I didn't end up finding it. Surprise. That's like the surprise ending. But that got me going because, like as you said, I'm fortunate enough that just over the years I've again dabbled in building, whether it's blockchain, now more recently more heavily in AI, things like that. And it just kind of struck me like, why can't I find something like that?
Yeah, let's get into that. In a couple of minutes. I think real quick, like what is pickup basketball? Like, how is it different from basketball? I'm sorry, like you lost me at that. I was like, what is pickup basketball?
It's a bunch of guys who probably take basketball more seriously than they should.
Okay.
Just random guys who on a recurring basis get together and just play, and so you get to know the other folks that you play with. But it's it's not any part of any like organized league or anything. We just
you just call it pickup basketball. So it's basketball.
Yes. It's not a different type of basketball.
Okay.
It's just like not necessarily organized basketball. It's just
got it.
Literally guys. Literally guys.
We can get into that later.
Yeah.
Try to understand.
Guys on a group chat, say, hey, every Sunday, whatever, we'll show up and we'll play, and for me, it's something that I really enjoy. So again, everybody has their things, right? So for me, it's basketball. For someone else, it's...
So the start of Whitespace actually came from a very niche need for you to improve your game at pickup basketball.
Yes.
Just to summarize in one line,
yes,
right? Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think what's interesting, and it's kind of apt that we have you as our guest for this month, because May is actually Mental Wellness Month. I didn't realize that until we agreed.
I didn't realize until you mentioned it.
Until we were like, hey, let's do it this month, right? I think there's a lot more awareness. Like, I grew up in Asia, so in Asia we don't talk about mental wellness or mental health. It's kind of a taboo thing to even talk about it, right? You just suffer in silence, and then something happens, right? But I think when I moved here to the US, I realized that people talk a little bit more about it. But over the last couple of years, it seems as there's more open conversations around mental health. So I think where I'm curious, just from your perspective, are we actually doing better and getting better at talking about mental wellness, or is just do you think it's just a lot of just talking and nothing else?
I think with anything, there's kind of positives and negatives going on. I think I can definitely relate to your background. I mean, even though I grew up in the States, it was more of a traditional like Asian household, so you don't really talk about your feelings very much. It's like one of those things for whatever it's worth. But I do think that there's less stigma, I guess, in terms of talking about things like that, which I think is much needed. On the other hand, I was just like looking around. I was looking this up because I was curious, but I think in terms of the stats of overall people who are facing like mental health, issues or disorders, it unfortunately is trending upwards. And I think in some ways that's maybe not surprising because of, we all kind of know it, like social media and all these, forces at play. So I think, there's maybe some contradictions there in terms of like where things are trending, but also I think there are definitely some positives in terms of people's willingness to talk about it, resources available, and then hopefully like, one of the big reasons, stepping back and a little bit higher level than just simply like my basketball hobby. I do think one of the reasons I'm so committed to Whitespace is because I do think something like this is needed in some ways. I mean, whether it's Whitespace or not, but like something that is always available, that's highly personal, and however you can manage it, that can help people who are even new to meditation practice just get familiar with it, get comfortable with it, and like the word is practice, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of built in. It's not necessarily something you need to know a lot about going into it, but just have it does help to have kind of an on ramp, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the reasons why, again, I'm so like locked in on building it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's pluses and minuses. But I do think the overall trend, um, it is there is a bit of urgency. I feel like, especially because of some of these broader things that are happening. You know, not least of which, I mean, it's a big buzzword these days, but AI, right?
Yeah.
And people are expecting like disruptions in terms of job security and things like that. So if that does come to pass, then I think people are going to need even more so like resources and tools to help them kind of stay centered as a lot of this stuff comes at them, So
Yep.
yeah.
So as you were, kind of researching Whitespace, you came across, you say you downloaded like different types of apps. I'm sure you talked to, people that you know about meditation, me included,
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the common misconceptions about meditation?
Yeah.
Because for me, it's like when I think meditation is like sitting there
Yeah,
with my
yeah,
eyes closed, and then for me, I fall asleep. I fall asleep really easily.
right,
But
right,
yeah.
right. Yes, yes. So no, I think there's a couple things. Firstly, I think the most common misconception is that meditation is very passive, meaning a lot of
Interesting.
people have the conception of it as equated to like doing nothing, which is sometimes part of like the just kind of the mainstream like conversation about it it's just how you hear about it. It's like, oh, I'm gonna go meditate and like sit somewhere and close my eyes and then so it's
Or like force yourself not to think, and then
force yourself,
and then
empty your mind
I
and
for me,
that
I'll
type of
think even
stuff.
more.
Right,
So
right,
yeah.
right, right. So I think that's one misconception, right?
Okay.
Because I mean, for me at least, I think meditation is actually almost like a channel, a pathway to get actually more connected with things internally and then externally. And then, so it actually opens up a lot of possibilities subsequently. And so, yeah, so I think that's one misconception. We can kind of go deeper into that. I also think just simply the passive side of this. I was actually talking to Z, who's in the audience, because he mentioned walking meditation, which is actually one of my favorite types of meditation. When my wife and I went down to Houston for this Taos retreat, that was like their main thing was walking meditation. That's like what they focused on, and it can be really, really like just, I mean, for one, relaxing, but just really introspective. Just to be, firstly, if you're going to do walking meditation, just disclaimer: don't do it in like heavy traffic. Don't do it in the downtown area or whatnot. But as long as you're in an area where it's safe, like it's nice to just, for instance, again, we don't need to get too deep into this, but one of the things they would say is like, for instance, focus on the sensation of the soles of your feet, as you're walking, and so, and then just let that kind of take you where it takes it, right? So, yeah, in some ways, that's kind of like the antithesis of what people think of as meditation, right? Very still, very, sedentary, whatnot. But it comes in all shapes and sizes.
Are some of these misconceptions kind of part of how you built Whitespace? Like, did you take all that into consideration as you were building Whitespace? Maybe just
Yeah, yeah, I think that's fair. I think one of the things, and I think we'll kind of get into this a little further too. One of the things that I wanted to like activate in Whitespace was that more proactive part of it, and I think no spoilers, but the name itself, which we'll get into, like meditate manifest, is kind of related to that, because I think yeah, again, meditation can certainly be about just calming and releasing and letting go of thoughts, especially thoughts that are like blockers or whatnot. But it can also then open up a space where you can actually activate your, let's say, your imagination, and do creative exercises in your mind, and then open up things like visualization. And actually, this is something that's becoming more and more prevalent in like, let's say, like professional sports and things like that. You'll hear about like professional athletes at the top of their respective disciplines doing things like building in like 5-minute mental rehearsals into their training or their regimen, and that's actually a form of like meditation, right? That's getting into a state where you're almost like training yourself internally to visualize a situation or scenario where you want to be at a peak of performance, let's say. But there's other variations of it, and so that type of activity, or that kind of use case, I guess you could call it, for meditation was very important for me to incorporate into Whitespace. And I also think another reason why the personalization side of it was so important for me, because I think if you think of like mental rehearsal or visualization and things like that, having it be, the more specific it can be to that person's actual situation, I think the more it would resonate. So again, my kind of silly example, thinking about playing basketball on a Sunday morning, if it can speak to me on those terms and in that context, it registers. It's like, yeah, that's what I'm visualizing, right? As opposed to something that's a little more generic, like you're an athlete, or you're going to play really well on some, whatever. Yeah. So something that's a little more generic, right? So, anyway, yeah, I think they all kind of tie together. And definitely it played, to answer your question, definitely played into how I thought about Whitespace and how I continue to think about Whitespace in terms of like what I want to, what I wanted to do, right? Yeah.
So I think that's interesting, right? Because you were talking about the basketball player. I mean, you need to sometimes to get ready for the game, you need one type of meditation. Maybe you need a different type of meditation after the game, or you're not in your basketball mode.
Right.
You're probably in like, I don't know, dad mode, boyfriend mode, whatever. And you need kind of, some guidance, right, in centering yourself. So I think it's really interesting. I think the personalization aspect, where people are different, at different points, in the day, right?
Yes.
And need some. So let's talk about that. In terms like, so structurally, because you mentioned Calm, Headspace, like those are two apps that probably the most popular ones.
Right.
How is Whitespace like structurally different? Maybe before you even talk about personalization, is there anything structurally different about the user experience? Or
I would say they're almost like polar opposites in some ways.
Like how?
Just fundamentally, in terms of Calm and Headspace, when you go in, you're searching. So it's you're basically actively searching for something. You're searching for like a match, right? I have sort of an idea of what I want, and then I start punching in things, and it'll bring up suggestions. Again, not unlike a Netflix or a Spotify or something like it. It works by way of categories and genres, or in some cases like the actual speakers. There's like very well-known speakers and things like that on Calm and Headspace. So it's about like categorization and filtering, and then like approximating like a best guesstimate of what the user is looking for, and they'll try to kind of fit that need. Whereas Whitespace, it is basically built for the user's specific intention from the ground up. So when they go in, it's not so much searching, it's asking. And the app will actually ask you proactively, what are you carrying, or how are you feeling? And by way of responding, and most recently, actually, now it actually have a little bit of a conversation with you to try to help you clarify for yourself. Because sometimes you may not even be able to articulate what's going on. And then it'll serve you like a program, an audio program, specifically based on that, that context, that intention. And so, I think that is fundamentally a different paradigm, right? And I think the only way that that's been possible now is because of the tools we have around AI, right? And I don't, I don't like blame or, Calm and Headspace are what they are because they were built like initially maybe 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. So they did the best with what they had in their model. But I think we're in a very like interesting time right now where entirely different models are possible because of the technology.
Yeah, I think what's interesting. So my husband, he likes meditation. He says, he sees it almost like like what I call it, like building up your meditation prowess over time. And it's like almost like getting to like the black belt of meditation, right?
Yeah.
So he likes the guided
Right.
aspect of it, where it challenges him. Like there are like steps that he has to take, and he
Right.
can kind of measure whether he's getting better. Is that something that, or is that the purpose of Whitespace, or is that something that the user can build within their experience?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. That's actually something that I'm still actively thinking through. And I want to be very intentional about how I build that into Whitespace. So it's honestly like very much so like still a work in progress. But from some of the feedback I've already gotten from some like power users, I guess you could call it, I actually got some really interesting like insights. One was specifically around this idea of progress, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the mainstream apps, Calm, Headspace, and others, the like again, very well intentioned. They want you to continue with your practice, to be consistent with your practice, and so they'll do things around like incentivizing you with streaks, or like have you practiced 5 days in a row, 7 days in a row, like congratulations, that type of thing. And I had a really interesting point of feedback from one of my users who said like those work, but actually on the occasion where you miss it, you miss a day, it actually like reverses itself in terms of the motivational side of it very quickly, where it's almost like it's like a reminder that you like messed up,
or like you failed.
I missed it, I broke my
Yeah.
streak, and then so now you go back and when you look at the app, you're like, oh, it's like a guilt trip. You're like, oh, I didn't do it, whatever.
Or you can feel defeated, right? Like sometimes,
Yeah.
there are times when my husband comes out of like, the room, and he's like,
Right.
I couldn't do what they were asking me to do.
Right,
And then he
right.
feels really defeated,
Right,
and then
right.
he skips like the next 2 to 3 days.
Exactly. So that
Yeah.
exactly. So that actually, when I heard that, I was like, you know what? That is like I can totally see that. And so I'm trying to think of progress. So I definitely think having a measure of progress and to see where you've been is important. And so, but I want to try to do that in more of like an not necessarily like a streak-based way or like a linear way, so to speak. So
It'll be interesting, right?
Yeah.
To figure out what that means.
yeah, so
Yeah.
so still thinking through. I think this latest version that I've pushed out has kind of like the beginnings of something around that, and we can kind of dive into that later. But yeah, it's intentionally trying to avoid this like gamified approach of of progress tracking, and more actually trying to speak to the user in terms of like where their sessions have been kind of focusing almost in terms of like a natural cycle of things, right? So, and if they're too heavy, and let's say, just to make an example, like taking information in or taking things in, whether that's emotions or experiences or burdens or whatnot, and then not having the opportunity to like express that or like release that, that in and of itself is a pressure that builds up in a person, because there's your cycle is kind of out of balance. So basically thinking about that approach, which is like, can we start to identify where people are maybe a little too weighted one way or the other in terms of just like a balanced movement or cycle, almost like your breath, right? If you imagine, if you're constantly inhaling and never exhaling, obviously that's not balanced.
Physically
And you're gonna
possible,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly, you're gonna get into a very like tense situation. And I think like generally your daily life is in a lot of ways very similar, right? So if you're always in one mode and you don't give yourself the opportunity to release, or vice versa, a lot of times that can be the source of some of these like internal tensions, right? So anyway, so that's kind of, again, it's a work in progress, but that's kind of one way I'm trying to approach it. It's a little different.
Yeah, let's talk about the unique proposition of your app. That's that we were talking about personalization. Like, so what does personalization mean in your platform? Like, maybe you can talk about the elements of it.
Yeah. So I think there's like different levels to it, like you said. I think there's the just the basic, bits and bobs and the technical side of it, where I can, I can choose the voice that I like, the backgrounds that I like. Some of the stuff that people are actually very used to in some apps, like especially like sleep apps and stuff. I want to pick crickets and whatever, soft rain or whatever, that type of thing. So that's a part of it, and that's kind of just like maybe a baseline of personalization. But I think for the actual effectiveness of the practice, I think it's obviously a little deeper, which is maybe twofold. One is to respond and to almost give the user confidence that it understands where they're coming from. It understands their intention and their context. And that comes from their inputs. And now, actually, with the conversational side, maybe some of the follow-on conversation, it'll ask clarifying questions and it'll actually give you a couple of suggestions, but you can also just answer free form if you want. And by way of that, it can generate, and then I think it's gotten pretty good at this, it can create, again, a program, which could be 1, 2, 3, or 4 audio sessions, almost like a chapters, right? To help you kind of progress and work through whatever you've expressed to it.
Yeah.
So I think that's one kind of critical aspect of personalization that I prioritized. But then I think the same is true over time. So the other thing the app does, and this is completely at the control of the user in terms of like their personal, anecdotes and things like that. But as you use it with more and more context and intentions, it'll get to know you better, right? So actually, as an example, I did a very brief meditation early this morning on loving kindness, and it actually mentioned part of the practice was to imagine your heart expanding and think of people that are important. So obviously, I thought of my wife. And then it actually mentioned, think of your wife and think of your sons, and it actually mentioned them by name.
Okay. So did you put all that information in before, or?
I did not put it into that particular intention,
Okay.
but it's from the historical
Reference.
reference, and it actually has an understanding of like which things might be more important. So obviously relatives, it'll kind of identify as kind of a important like keystone, I guess. And then, again, like I said, at any time, user can kind of go in, and then if there's things they're not comfortable with, they can like line item delete. Like, I don't want it to remember this and that and this and that. So I think that's also a very important part of personalization. But I think, all of this is for a specific purpose and intention, which is I want Whitespace to be, not the end all be all, but for what it is, I want it to be the most effective tool for someone to use meditation and like address various thoughts, concerns, whatever. And I think the effectiveness is directly related to how, in a lot of ways, how personalized it is and how personalized it feels. Because if you imagine one version is that something is very, very generic and it comes off as, it may still be very effective, but it's almost like blunt. It's like not, it doesn't ring particularly loud, like kind of strongly for someone. In other instances, like the other extreme is that if you have a guided meditation or whatnot that actually says something or speaks to something that does the opposite, it's something maybe you don't agree with or is not particularly relevant, it'll actually take you out of the moment. So that's kind of like the opposite of it, right? So I want to go to the other extreme, which is as you hear, you're almost like, yes, like I understand, like that's me, or that's, and so it's almost circular, right? Because it's like the thing that I'm working on, I'm giving it to Whitespace and I'm hoping that it can give it back to me with a particular technique and a particular approach that helps me internalize it, because sometimes it's a struggle. People just mentally try to send messages to themselves. It's like it doesn't, for whatever reason, it just doesn't happen that easily. So anyhow, so I think
I think what's so interesting, because even for AI models, right? I mean, taking it out of the context of meditation, right? For AI models, you kind of need to train it, as we do ChatGPT, Claude, whatever. It takes time to get to know you.
Yeah.
So how do you how do you incorporate that, learning by the model within Whitespace, right? Because like,
Yeah.
if you kind of need to get there quicker so
Right.
that the person using the app doesn't get too frustrated that the app doesn't really understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Still a work in progress. Haven't found the silver bullet yet, but
Okay.
I have put a lot of thought and time and energy into like the base. You call it like the system prompt from an AI perspective, and what for those who might not be familiar, the system prompt is basically the set instructions you send along with any set of like requests to your AI. It's kind of what gives the character to the AI that you're working with. And so I spent a lot of time working on this base foundation of the prompts. And some of that is some of the learning and some of the how would you say it, the bedside manner, I guess is one way to say it, of the app is kind of built into that side of it. And some things are very critical, like for instance, if there are triggers in terms of trauma that have come up, it actually highlights those. It knows to highlight those very carefully, and in a lot of cases to cautiously deal with them, i.e., maybe not like be specifically not mention them if they're known to be triggers for that particular person. And then conversely, it'll also identify, like I mentioned earlier, whether it's like relatives or things like that. It'll know certain things that are just more likely to have like a resonance effect with the user, and it'll kind of remember that. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I think like you mentioned AI, they're working through this too, the GPTs of the world and whatnot, and I think they're getting there. But it's maybe in some ways similar where, and I think in some ways maybe less transparent the way they're doing it. But they are building profile histories too.
Yeah, of
Right.
course. Yeah.
And so that's one way that they're trying to do it, which is like, oh, I know you've searched on these things before, and then that'll clue them in to your intention for the subsequent thing, right? But as far as I know, I don't think they have like the line item delete aspect of it. There's not a lot of visibility into like what they remember, what they don't.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Totally.
So I think that is one way that I'm trying to approach it. But again, for me, like transparency is very important in terms of that aspect of it. But yeah, I think it's going to be an ongoing work in progress to continue to refine that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying so hard not to laugh because I mean, you mentioned like your wife is the most important person, like so she's baked into kind of, the experience of meditation, right? Like in my case, just say if I fight with my husband, right? The last thing I want is him coming out in his meditation app. So like, I'm like, okay, how do I prompt it? I'm like, okay, don't talk about him. Give me someone else, or like, or vice versa, right? If he's doing it. So, I'm pretty sure you'll figure something out.
Well, actually, on that point,
trigger words.
Yeah. Some days a trigger, some days the opposite. No, but I think one thing that is actually like an enabling technology for this is just the baseline intelligence of these models. And so one way that I've been using Whitespace more and more, and again, this actually came from one of my like power users. They mentioned that sometimes they'll just do stream of consciousness and literally do like speech input. They'll just you can hold to do an audio and then not even have a specific request. Just be like, today I got into a fight with my significant other and this and that, and then you can even say like give me a meditation, but don't mention XYZ, right?
Yeah.
And they're intelligent enough to like flow that into the session itself. So I think that's, again, like thinking about why this is possible now versus it not being possible 5-10 years ago. Like that's definitely one aspect to it, which is like the baseline intelligence of the models. I mean, again, we don't need to get into particulars per se, but I use Claude, and I did it the same way I went into like a binge of meditation apps. I went into like a binge episode or period with all the AI models. And the one thing that I found about Claude, even more so than GPT and Gemini and all these others, its ability to retain context even a like very large system prompt plus all the things that the user put in plus their profile history and whatever, and then actually like be consistent about all of it was like much higher, at least from what I observed.
Yeah, me too.
And so that was one main reason that why I used it and continue to use it, because obviously that's one of the key things, right? It's like any slip up in terms of those things, it's again, it takes you out of the practice. You're like, wait a minute, what? Like that's not. I don't remember saying that, or like that's not what I wanted, or like any of that. So it's like a kind of like a fine balance.
Interesting. So you mentioned that you have, a couple of power users. I tried really hard to be one of your power users, but I failed miserably.
I appreciate the effort.
I think my question is, like, what is one surprising thing that kind of came out of, the usage by your power users that even you didn't anticipate?
Oh yeah.
That has kind of maybe, influenced the app a little bit or how it's built.
Oh, a lot. So I do have to give a shout out to Ash, who was one of my big power users. So I don't know if Ash is watching, but if she is, you're definitely one of, if not the biggest power user. Okay, easily the biggest power user so far. So like for example, some of the feedback that I got from Ash was some of the stuff that I touched on, which was like the value of having something almost like a stream of consciousness. And I actually have gotten that feedback from some other folks that have been just periodically trying to help me think about the app and things like that, almost from like a startup or a business perspective. And so that's actually one direct feedback loop that I've actually reincorporated. So now if you open the app, it's actually much more, the speech input is actually much more prioritized than the text input. Because I found for myself that is actually potentially like that should be the primary interface. Because a lot of times, again, like for one, it's faster, but two, it's almost the natural way that you want to and can express yourself. Because again, sometimes you just can't. If you sit like, it's almost intimidating if you have the line and you're just like, and the thing's asking you how you feel, and you're like, I feel sad, or I feel.
Does the app like pick up sentiment too?
Ooh, that is interesting.
Because I mean, like I can say I am sad versus I'm really sad. You know what I mean? It's like tone and everything. Does it read that at this moment, or?
So I think at the moment it does translate it into text first, so it's speech to text.
Okay.
But again, I think the baseline intelligence is such that it actually does pick up on a lot of those subtleties. I think, and then the flip side, which we haven't gotten into yet, but the flip side of it, another enabling technology of this is the quality of the voice output. So the text to speech, the other side of it. And again, another binge like rabbit hole I went down, and I was like, trying all the different voice models and stuff. And one stood out in particular. That's 11 Labs for any of like the nerds out there. The that model, wow, like that was one of the gating factors for me. Was like if the voice wasn't good enough, then that's like, let's just nix the idea, because it's like it depends so heavily on the quality of the voice and its ability to do those things like intonation, subtle intonations around emotion or delivery. And like 11 Labs, like however they did it, they nailed it. Like their voice model is still like by far like head and shoulders above next tier. And so it's kind of two sides of the coin. I think it's not quite at the point where it's taking the voice directly in and like actually modulating like the rhythms and all that stuff, but it is good enough that even with the text conversion, it can pick up subtle things. Like if you say I'm sad versus I'm really sad, then obviously that's a different, kind of that's a different intention there, right? And then on the flip side, the voice coming back, again, that's one of the things. Like if the voice isn't good enough, it's something that would take you out of the practice instead of helping you deepen it, right? Because it'd be like, that doesn't sound right, or it just kind of snaps you out of it, right? So that's been a really important aspect of it too, is getting that right. So I spent like a lot of time fine tuning that as well.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. So I think one other really interesting thing about the app that you wrote in the descriptor was that it's available in multiple languages, right? Like I think it was like 40 plus languages.
Yep.
Right. I mean, outside of the context of meditation, like AI is known to not function equally well across different cultures and languages,
Yeah.
right? Especially if it's minority kind of cultures or languages where, there isn't a lot of data that it
Yeah.
can feed off, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how does your app navigate that? Like,
Yeah. I mean, I think again, there's certainly like I'm not one to say that it's like it's going to get it perfect every single time. There's certainly going to be room for improvement, and I think a big part of that is because of just even the frontier models themselves, like you said, they
yeah,
have blind spots in terms of different cultural nuances and things like that. Um, but what I can say is that again, the baseline intelligence does capture a lot of things that are valuable in that respect. So, like whether it's, um, for instance, if you do the same intention in one locale versus another, it'll actually introduce culturally relevant references or metaphors. Whether it's like a lot of things are actually um, influenced by the natural environment of certain cultures. So for instance, like a meditation in native German will have very like kind of grounded, earthy references, like not to be too,
okay,
whatever,
yeah,
stereotypical or whatever. But and then Japanese will have kind of very, sometimes it'll be like almost like Zen-like references in terms of like their traditional kind of modalities, but then also like natural environments. It's mountains and streams and kind of like things that are kind of very prevalent in like the Japanese kind of um, um, kind of culture, right? Their kind of mind frame, and then actually some more specific things. This is not something I'm like super familiar with, but just having like looked at how it was trying to adjust for some of these things, um, it was very particular about, for instance, like Persian. Persian was one locale where I think the language was shared. The specific language was shared between Persia and maybe other like even like I mean I might get this wrong, but like even like Afghanistan, etc. But the specific way of speaking, even using the same language, the specific way of speaking, like grammatically, for instance, or things they would reference, was very different. And so it specifically highlighted if it's somebody who's coming from Persian locale, use the language, but be very careful not to introduce, like, for instance, like Afghan, phrasings or things like that, right? So I think there are instances where it can start to parse that out, but again, I'm sure it's not perfect. But the intention is there, the effort is there, and I think again, part of the reason why I wanted to make it available in so many languages is just I think it's a global thing,
yeah, there's a global need
there's a
for,
global need for it, and hopefully part of this is like trying to get the flywheel going, right? So
yeah,
if people, actually, funny enough, it just occurred to me, I had one user who, again, I may get the locale wrong, but it was, I think, Czech. I think he's Czechoslovakian. And he mentioned specifically that some of the words were like, Ukrainian or something. Like, it was like, oh, yeah, this was really good, but there were a couple words that were actually like the wrong, like, vocabulary or something like that. Yeah, so that was one example of like, oh, okay, and then that was like very useful feedback. So
or you probably would have to learn kind of new phrases and
yeah,
trending phrases in other languages that may not necessarily
yes.
be.
So actually, in that instance, it was a matter of like fine tuning the prompt, actually, just to be more sensitive to that particular aspect, that particular locale, and then that specific situation. But yeah, so I think it's like anything, it's just gradual improvements, and I think feedback is a huge part of it, right?
So where are you seeing your users from, like non-English users from so far?
Um, yeah, I mean, obviously it's like fits and starts, right? So I'm not saying there's like a flood of users, but what has been really interesting to see is just for the users that do come in, it's like all over the world. Japan, Eastern Europe, Northern Europe. I have users in Africa, Nigeria.
Interesting. Yeah.
Not as many in South America so far, but Spain. So yeah, it's been really amazing to see in Russia, and since I implemented the language aspect of it, that's also been really interesting to observe. And there's always things like now I'm kind of like into the app optimization side of things because like even so, there's always things that are blockers or friction points or whatnot. But just I'm very much encouraged to see that when they're using the app, from the moment they open it, let's say if they're in Russia and their phone is already set to Russian, the app will identify that and then convert itself to Russian. So app text and spoken language. And then so I know that at least the experience from that point is like localized to them. And that's been really, really cool to kind of know that that's working. So, so yeah, I think again,
Remains to be
still
seen.
iterating on it, but I think it's really, really cool to kind of see, people just popping in from like all of these different, all over the world. It's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I might get some friends, some of my good friends in Korea to like test it because they always have all these weird like trending phrases that come up, and see if it recognizes or understands.
Actually, on that, I had one of my Twitter friends actually make a really funny suggestion. I tried to implement it, but I fell short. And his suggestion was to have an Easter egg for Chinglish and Konglish.
Oh, yeah.
Which I could have sworn at one point 11 Labs had that accent, which is like English but with like a Chinese accent.
Yep.
And then I tried to do it, but they must have corrected themselves or something because it just came out normal, perfect spoken English. And I was
you could try Singlish, and there's a whole new market in Singapore.
Oh, Singlish, la, it has to end with la.
La, yeah. Awesome. Well, so when you first shared the app with me, it was just called Whitespace. Now it's Whitespace Meditate Manifest, right?
Yeah.
Like, any particular reasons for that?
Oh man, I have been going like around and around and around in circles in terms of the name, and then also just like the marketing side of it. You actually touched on it earlier. Where part of the struggle is because some people think meditation is very niche, and in some ways it certainly is. But then for like maybe folks as you kind of go deeper into meditation, you find that it's actually a huge category of like dozens and dozens of different genres and practices and use cases and approaches and intentions and this and that, right? And so I found myself actually when the very first naming, I think I've probably gone through like 4 or 5 different names, but for a period of time it was Whitespace Sleep Learn Focus, and that was just like 100% pure like App Store optimization. I was like, what are the popular words? Like people want sleep, they want focus, and then like I was kind of experimenting with like learning functions, like learning your sleep and stuff. So anyway, that was just very there wasn't a lot of like science behind that one, but but I think one of the main difficulties I found was like whenever I found myself like trying to like speak to one particular use case of meditation, I inevitably found myself like but I'm like leaving out this whole like genre or set of intentions, right? And so ultimately, I kind of came around and I kind of took a step back, and I've also been reading into, and for my own purposes, I actually believe, like very, very firmly believe in the power of like self-talk. Like how you talk to yourself internally has like outsized impact on actually how you like your day, just how you experience your day to day.
Yep.
And some people may call that like manifestation. I mean, if like, again, there's like the woo-woo scale or whatever. I mean, even if you don't believe in any of that stuff, I think just positive self-talk, it just like, I think common sense is that has certainly a bigger benefit than the opposite, right? Like negative self-talk is like the other side of it, right? And that definitely has detriments,
Or even recognizing there's negative self-talk.
Or being more aware of how you talk to yourself, right? It's like kind of a lot of times the first step. So that's something that I firmly believe in. And then for me, it became more and more important to like incorporate that as one of the primary uses for Whitespace. Again, because I think it plays to the strengths of the app, which is the personalization side of it is actually it's useful for a lot of things, but it's particularly useful for like affirmations and visualization and manifestation and things like that, because those tend to be much more specific. It's like, I have an in real life interview with Ellen on Friday. Like, I'm like nervous or whatever, like, and I can speak to it on those terms, and it'll speak back to me on those terms. How do I get myself centered or whatnot? And I think that's true for anybody. Again, it's kind of this like the resonance factor of the practice, particularly a guided practice. How do you kind of like optimize that or maximize that? And I think personalization is like one of those levers that can be very, very effective if it's done right, and you're able to kind of like fine tune it so it stays at a certain level. And then I think, coming back full circle to where we started, I think meditate and manifest, the more I thought about it, were very, very complementary and a little bit contrarian, because again, like the common misconception of meditation is that it's very passive, and it's just like something that you do, and it's more about like reducing activity, instead of actually activating things, And so I think for me that's almost like an important educational side of it, which is meditation can do all those things and is very, very good at doing all those things, which is like making you calm and making you centered. And sometimes the best thing is to be like sedentary and just to be still. But through that practice, it actually opens the door to actually very like a whole variety of very proactive things, very like empowering things, right? And that's kind of like the manifest side of it. So yeah, so I think, it's kind of a roundabout way, but I'm very, very comfortable, and I feel really good about where it's ended up at. So that moniker and that combination specifically of those two words, because I think in the years to come, like those are going to be increasingly important, right? Like being able to find your center, find calm when stuff's coming at you, like AI this and this and that, whatever, like politics, blah, all this stuff. And then secondly, in terms of the kind of global trends, right, for mental health, unfortunately, mental health disorders, like 1 in 8, like the World Health Organization just released some stats, like 1 in 8 people globally have some form of mental health disorder,
Oh, wow.
typically in the form of anxiety or depression.
Wow. Yeah.
And then subsequently, the other stat, which was kind of eye-opening, was that like 1/10 thereabouts, only 1/10 of those people suffering from those disorders have access to resources and support.
It's
right. Yeah. And so I think those two together kind of tell a story, which is like, and then you think about, again, because I work in technology and I see these things coming, like they're definitely factors that are going to unfortunately push that more so than less so, right? Because of, again, the disruptions and job security and things like that. So when I think about all those things, like one, finding a center, but then two, like, again, trying to activate that to help you kind of carve out more of like a positive niche in the world when maybe stuff around you is kind of going sideways or whatnot, I think is going to be more and more important. And so, yeah, like for whatever it's worth, that's like one hope of mine, is that people can find this as a resource, like in those, in those situations.
Yeah. I think before we get to the blockchain part, one other question. So, you mentioned the different modalities for meditation, right? So does the app right now, is it more kind of created around like a seated kind of meditation modality, or does it allow for like, I don't know, walking meditation or
So,
drawing or writing?
Yeah. Oh, drawing is an interesting one too. It has 4 primary kind of modalities right now.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly, one of them is sleep, so bedtime. One of them is daytime, which is like, if I think about it, it's like someone taking their 10-minute coffee break or something, and just going into a side room and like sitting for a bit and resting or whatever. Eyes closed, whatnot. A third one, which I was talking to Z about, is walking meditation. that was like a personal favorite of mine, is that I wanted to put that in there because I was like, wait a minute, I don't want to close my eyes. I'm like walking through the park or something, right? So I want that. And then the fourth is actually slightly different. It's daytime, but it's awakening. And the reason for that is because there have been certain specific studies that show, I mean, people, again, these are kind of buzzwords these days, but like neuroplasticity and this and that. Another term is hypnagogic. I don't know if that's something people are more aware of, but hypnagogic just simply means like rest state, like sleeping, like the state between sleep and awake.
Is it like the yoga nidra kind of practice or something? That's what I
could be. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of meditation, the purpose is to get you into that state.
Okay.
And so, but your body is naturally in that state, like the 10 minutes before you fall asleep and 10 minutes after you wake up. And so that actually has a lot of uses, particularly if you're trying to almost like retrain or like rewire some thoughts, or like internally just like, again, like center yourself in particular ways. And so awakening is designed for that, like basically listening to right after you wake up. Right. So it's kind of like the opposite of the sleep time, right?
Yeah.
So it's, but the underlying rationale is similar, right? It's like targeting, again, that restful sleep state. And if you read things around like, again, varying degrees of the woo-woo scale, but like if you read things around manifestation and stuff like that, self-talk, and sometimes it's like repetition, affirmation, things like that. A lot of them like recommend or like strongly suggest doing certain things, whether it's repeating or writing things, like at those periods, like before you go to sleep, or like right after you wake up. And that's kind of the reason, right? It's because your mind is a little more malleable, or like more open in those states. So anyway, those are kind of the four primary modalities. But then I think in terms of genres and practices, again, this is one of those things that kind of comes with just like the baseline intelligence of the models. Like for instance, when I did loving kindness this morning, I do have some of that in the prompts because I know that's a very important form of practice, but it's not like necessarily one that like comes up on the menu or something like that. It's off menu. But if you ask for loving kindness, it'll know, like, here's a meta practice for loving kindness, and it'll, there's a lot of visualization around the heart and like warmth of the heart and expanding the heart and things like that. So it knows a lot more than maybe it lets on when you first kind of go into it. So and obviously, again, always room for improvement, but yeah, I think between those kind of different vertices or whatever, it can cover a fair amount of ground. But that's it. I don't think it's not meant to be a substitute for practice, particularly like, let's say, in person or direct, like guided meditation. It's I think in an ideal scenario, it's like a complement. And again, because of the nature of it is something that's readily available, as personalized. I was actually thinking about this the other day, over the weekend, and it just struck me as I was like in the airport, and I was watching people walk around with their cups of coffee, and then you see Starbucks, and they're like, like anything, Starbucks is like churning out the coffee and stuff like that. And I don't know why it struck my mind, but I was like, why can't meditation be like coffee? It's like coffee is not a natural behavior. It's a trained behavior, but people get a benefit from it because it wakes them up and it does certain things. But it's like a daily regimen for a lot of people. If you do Starbucks, it's not that cheap. It's like whatever, $5-6 these days or whatever. But it's like that 5-10 minutes out of the day. It's like an important like ritual that they go through. And for me, I was like, why can't meditation be more like that in some ways, where it's like people know that it's something that's beneficial and they kind of allocate that time, and it's not something they dread or it's a burden. It's like something they look forward to. Like, where's my 10 minutes? Yeah, I don't know. It's like,
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Like I don't use apps to meditate.
Yeah.
But I think my most meditative state would be when I'm cooking, because no one bothers me. I'm not, I'm just focused on doing whatever is in front of me.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually I'm not focused on that. I'm thinking about other things, but
Right.
that's where like, ideas come and so on. Some people say that their best ideas come in the shower, but that's also because they are probably in a meditative state, maybe.
Yep. Yep.
And they're relaxed and yeah.
I mean, it's interesting again, somewhat coming full circles when I
Yeah.
was talking about the basketball thing. Like a big part of it was trying to get into the flow.
Yeah.
People talk about flow state.
Flow state.
I
Yep.
think the two are very highly correlated. It's like flow state is a deeply meditative state, I think, in my mind, like the way I would interpret it. In fact, more than one person, a good friend of mine and another person who's been helping, they were interested in my app to help their golf game, which is, I'm not a big golfer, but like I can imagine it is one of those things where it's very, very important to try to get into that deep like flow state, right? Otherwise you start hitting the ball like this way, that way, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think what actually helped, quick aside, one of my friends who came to the island, we had a nice dinner, not into meditation at all or any of these things, but good family friend of mine. So I was like, I'm building this app and like, and you guys try it or whatever. And like asked him like, what might you use it for? He was like golf, like, cause he's like super into golf. Fast forward like 3 months later, and I get like a text out of the blue. He's like, I used your app and I finished like top 3 in like my club tournament or something like that. And he's like, I was so happy or whatever. And I was like, this is awesome. So I don't know. That's just one anecdote, but like the cause and effect of these things are always kind of really hard to parse out. But like the fact that he attributed it in his mind to like at least there was some benefit of using this and like doing that, like that made me really happy. And then another person I talked to was like similar. It's still TBD because it's more recent conversation, but same thing. Like he's been like he actually goes to like golf doctors and stuff like that. Like pays people to try to help him like with his golf game and things like that. And then he used Whitespace, and over the course of a couple sessions, like his response was pretty funny. He ended up sending me an email out of the blue. He was like, "How do you do these scripts?" And I was like,
"Oh, you mean the prompts?"
Yeah, no, like actually the like how do you generate the scripts?
Okay. Oh.
Like the guided practice that comes back. And I was like, this could mean that it went really badly or it went really well. I wasn't sure which one it was.
Okay.
And then, but it turns out, thankfully, it was because it surprised them because the script that came back was actually really good.
Oh, okay.
And so he was curious. He was like, how did you do that? Like, how did you do that? And again, this is someone who's like for years paid like, sports doctors or whatever to like analyze his game, to like do mind game stuff, mind analysis and mental game and all that stuff.
And AI is doing it better.
And the AI in this case,
well,
and I think in this case, it's kind of the AI coupled with, I think the interesting thing was he had tried actually, independent of all of this, before he even heard of Whitespace and all that, he had tried to create his own script through like Google Gemini. And then use like the built-in voice to try to do that, right? And then he sent me actually literally the entire script that Google Gemini sent, and I read it, and I was like, it's okay. But you could tell it was just kind of like a generic output. It was just like kind of repeating back to him the things that he was like trying to do, and it was just like very, it was almost like very sanitized or something. It was like, yeah, and it's kind of hard to explain, kind of hard to put your finger on, but like, I know that in Whitespace, there are certain underlying principles that, again, I've spent a lot of time trying to think about and shape it and put it in, that are not intended to be prescriptive, but are intended to be kind of like a baseline in terms of like how, like for instance, one classic example of this, one kind of, if I were to name and some of the principles, one key principle is like that which you think about actually attracts more attention. And actually, I'll say that a little better. More specifically to things that give you anxiety or stress or fears or like kind of negative thoughts, right? The impulse in a lot of cases for people is to resist it or to try to push it away or to reject it or say, no, like I don't want that, like reject it. And the counterintuitive thing is that actually the more you do that, the more you actually empower that feeling. And so it's that's one of the underlying principles, which is like that which you try to reject actually gives it more mind share, like gives it more power, like mental attention. And so for this individual who was thinking about his golf game, that was a key difference between what Google Gemini put out and what Whitespace put out. Because in Whitespace, like, this guy is like a phenomenal golfer, which is kind of another interesting thing is like no matter how good you are at something, there's always a mental aspect. Like there's some struggle.
Yeah.
And he's like a scratch golfer. He like literally played against Tiger Woods in high school. Like he's like really really good golfer. So it's also very interesting to think about. Like somebody like that is still like struggling. Like they think of themselves as like not doing the best that they can. And in that particular case, I think the specific session that he found really powerful really helped him because instead of resisting what was causing him anxiety and in his mind impacting his game, the main thing was he realized that he was too concerned about how other people thought of him, specifically in the context of the game. Like, oh, because they think I'm so good, so I got to live up to the thing, and then like it puts pressure on himself and all that. And so the session actually just helped him acknowledge that and just kind of like accept that that was there, and not necessarily to push it away, but just to observe it, almost acknowledge it, and then be okay with it. And I think that's something that maybe like on a certain level like resonated with him, and it was maybe like novel because maybe he hadn't heard it in that particular way previously. So yeah, anyhow, long answer to a short question, but that was those are a couple
Interesting.
examples. Yeah.
Maybe there could be a niche audience that Whitespace would be catering to. The sports people, the athletes.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we met because we were both working in the blockchain space, right? So it was really exciting when you shared that, hey, because I didn't know there was a blockchain component to it, and you're like, no, there is a Web3 component to it.
Yep.
Tell us. Okay, for those who are not familiar, maybe with what blockchain and Web3 is, maybe just a quick kind of primer on that, and then share how is it integrated with you.
Yeah.
Or like, yeah.
So I'll try to do the TLDR of blockchain. Blockchain is I think it's fundamentally a technology about authentication, I guess in some ways I would describe it. Taking actions or creating assets online that can be kind of certifiably linked to some source. That source doesn't necessarily need to be named per se. It doesn't need to be tied to a specific person, but even just like an ID or a consistent like reference point on the web or whatever. A ledger is sufficient, right? So it's something that at least for the moment cannot be hacked or broken in that sense. I mean maybe that's somewhat dependent on the chain, etc. But like the main ones that's very much the case. I think the other aspect of blockchain that is interesting for me since the get-go is that it's I had this conversation actually with somebody at one of your conferences, and we're talking about whether it makes sense, like in this case it was for like a restaurant, and things like that. And the way it occurred to me when we're talking, like why use blockchain versus like just like Groupon or something or whatever. And for me, I think the differentiator is like if something is like, way I think about it, if it's like single player versus multiplayer, blockchain is inherently better in like a multiplayer context, right? Meaning when you have lots of different people, maybe from different
a shared ecosystem almost.
A shared ecosystem, and it becomes it's really like ultimately a tool for like building community, I think, in a lot of ways. Those communities can take lots of different shapes and forms and whatnot. And so for the purposes of Whitespace, it's been really interesting actually the past couple months, because the app in a lot of ways is like single player. It's like, meditation is a very introspective, single individual type of practice. But now having integrated it with Web3, I'll talk about some of the specific functionalities and stuff like that. It's introduced kind of an interesting like community aspect to something that is predominantly very like individual. And that's been really cool. Like, so on X, I think some folks from the Whitespace Web3 community will, I think, be watching this. So shout out to you guys. I think in Web3, a lot of people gather around for lots of like some grand ideas, some not so grand, but for whatever reason, very, very viral and motivation, like very like successful communities are built out of just like silly ideas that are funny, that people find really funny. Whatever the reason, I think Whitespace is part of maybe a kind of upcoming trend to have some Web3 assets based more on like real world projects. And so for my purposes, like we do have a token, it's a white token. But it's people understand that token is native to the project. So the project comes first, the app comes first, and the token is there to support it. And it's kind of a rallying point for the community. And then by way of that, I have now implemented and will continue to implement like utility for that token. So whether it's using the token to be able to buy subscriptions, using the token to buy like credits, which can then be used to create meditations, using the token as like a gating mechanism for participation. So like for instance, like vote, we had some community contests and stuff, and to be able to vote, you had to kind of prove that you were a holder. And then I think the last frontier, and this ties into the streak and the gamification side of it, because I'm still actively thinking through that, but ultimately rewards, right? I think I do want to do something around rewards, but I don't want it to just be like, you got 10 days in a row, like congrats, like here's your trinket or whatever.
Yeah.
It has to be, I want it to be something more like holistic, but that is kind of like where I'm kind of thinking next. But yeah, I think it's like Web3 is uniquely, I think, a bridge from something that might be more siloed to something that is like multiplayer or community based. And that's how I'm kind of approaching it for Whitespace.
So I think a couple of questions. First, like, is the engagement on the app correlated to, on-chain activity with the token in any way? That's my first question. Like, is it reflected, right? I think my second question is, how do people get the tokens? Is it something that they purchase, or do they have to earn it? Because you call it a utility token, right?
Yeah. So I think the activity, for the moment, it's not like strongly coupled. I'm actually focusing certainly in recent weeks, more so on the app and trying to get that right, because I think because it's like a real world, they'll say RWA, real world asset. I think the token is going to, in a lot of ways, follow the performance of the app. So, and my community understands that. I've actually been pretty like transparent about that from the start. So I think that's one way that I've been thinking about it. That said, interestingly, I'm also trying to balance out things on the community side. So we were actually looking to do more just like fun things like games or whatnot to keep the community engaged. So yeah, in a lot of respects, they are not like one-to-one coupled, like super coupled, especially because the people who come to the app have probably never even heard of Web3. Like I said, they're coming from Russia and Ukraine, and like just they're finding their way in through the App Store in a lot of cases. So, but I think ultimately, again, it's kind of like when the flywheel gets going, there's a lot of opportunity for like cross-pollination, I would call it. But yeah, it's not a main driver right now per se. Sorry, what was the second question?
How do people get the tokens? Is it something that they purchase, or they have to earn it? And
yeah. So the way this token was minted was somewhat unique. So I actually did it through a token platform called Orynth, ORYNTH.dev, and they are a platform for actually like startup founders who want to have a token to support their projects. And the way they do it is actually very, if I'm using the word right, egalitarian. Like it's just 500,000 tokens, and like that's it. That's all there ever be. And even the founder themselves does not get an allocation. So like anything I hold,
limited supply.
Limited supply, and I had to buy my own allocation out of pocket. And so So basically, to get tokens, you either have to purchase it, or now because I have a supply again, I'm thinking about maybe some reward systems in the future. I would then like some of my supply, I kind of have my mind earmarked for maybe some utility down the road. But it's basically one or the other, which I think ultimately is actually a very fair way to go about it, because I think a lot of the times people get concerned, like especially if you have a token that people can just like mint
Yeah.
infinitely, it's like you never know when they're gonna just push the button and just like mint a bunch of stuff. Um, so in our case, that's not even an option. Yeah.
So the limited supply gives it value in a way where, right? You have to, it has to be tradable in the future. People have to.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
So I think right now it's maybe like an $8,000 market cap or something like that,
Oh, nice.
which is not. It was at like the peak. The peak was like 50K, and it went like one of these when it
Wow.
first launched. Um, partially because it's the nature of tokens.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are just like pump, and then whatever. But yeah, no. So I think again, I'm still very fortunate and grateful. Like the community is there, and but it's also one of the reasons why I'm so focused on the app because I think the token will follow the success or the performance of the app in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Rather than vice versa, I think.
I think it's very interesting because I think, well, I mean, I guess in the US, maybe like meditation it's a very solo practice and it's private. I grew up, or I went to a Buddhist school, so actually my first kind of experience with meditation was with like a whole bunch of people, right?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
In elementary school. I mean, we did like 6 years
Yeah.
of meditation and chanting, although we didn't really understand what we were doing. We were just forced to do it. But I mean, it created some sort of like discipline, right? To be able to sit there for like, 30 minutes, and not doing it, not moving and so on. But I think that's where it's really interesting with the whole blockchain Web3 component.
Yeah.
Where, I think meditation is not, can be expanded into more of a group practice,
Yeah.
a group experience versus
Yeah.
solo practice.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, no, that's definitely an area I've been thinking about too. Again, we're not quite at the critical mass to be able to do it. Like, kind of do it on a recurring basis. But I actually, again, through my explorations in other apps, I've seen there's some that are actually specifically focused on group meditation. And it's pretty interesting what they do is like almost you can literally see like a map of the globe and where people are located and where they're practicing. And sometimes they'll try to time it such that like, hey, people in this region are doing it at this time, and then you can, practice together even remotely or whatnot. So I think there's some really interesting things to do around that. So it's in the back of my mind, but like, I have to kind of get the core experience like, up and running
Optimized,
first.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, before I open, for questions to the floor, one last question to wrap our segment up. So, if you were like, where do you see this convergence of, blockchain, AI, and wellness
Yeah.
coming together in terms of like, how does it shape the future of human behavior?
Oh, that's a big one. But I hope that, again, whether it's Whitespace or other tools or use cases that come about, like I think one of the things you'll hear on the airwaves or whatever is just like a lot of the negatives around the technology. In either case, whether it's AI, blockchain, what have you, robotics, that's going to come around pretty shortly. If not
Quantum
already.
computing.
Yeah, you hear about the risks a lot. And it's like anything with news, like that gets the clicks or whatever.
Sensationalized.
So exactly. Yeah, so you don't hear about the positive use cases as much. But I think there are a lot. I think there are a lot of positive use cases, especially as like I mentioned a couple times, like Whitespace, for example, wouldn't even be possible without a lot of the technology that's came into being over the past like 1 or 2 years. And I think that'll continue to be the case. And so I think specifically around the intersection of things, I think this, one specific way I see this kind of manifesting itself, both in terms of Whitespace, but as a broader theme, is like this theme of hyper personalization. So if I had my way, I think of Whitespace as a way to scale personalized experiences, right? Which otherwise wouldn't be possible without some AI mechanism driving it, because it's just not possible to do something super personalized to like 10 million people or whatever the number is. And I think that's true not only for Whitespace, but for a lot of other potential niches or whatnot, right? So I think that's going to be more and more a theme, like from here on out. I think that does play into blockchain too. Ultimately, is like as I think reading some of the materials or kind of the questions you were thinking of. As you go down the route of hyper personalization, and obviously privacy, data security, those come to the fore, and that's where blockchain is particularly effective as a tool. So I think if there's kind of a nexus point, that's one that I kind of foresee. And then I think specifically on the wellness side of it, I was actually listening to a podcast of this entrepreneur. His name is James Bashara. And it's a really interesting story. He actually had a failed startup, like Y Combinator failed startup, and then ended up doing his own thing more in the wellness sector. Actually, it was like an organic, like caffeine drink or something like that. But anyway, he wrote this blog article that kind of went semi-viral like maybe 5 years ago, and it was about the concept of mental wealth. So not just mental health, but mental wealth. And he may very well have coined it. I don't know if somebody can do the look back or whatever, but most commonly attributed to him. And basically, his premise was like a lot of times people think about mental health as kind of like, a situation where you're trying to cure a disorder. I mean, it's much more used in the context of a disorder or an issue, as opposed to something that is more preventative, let's say, or even going further as like an investment, a surplus of mental health. And I think, again, for me, this comes back to this idea, rightly or wrong. I mean, maybe it's a weird analogy, but I kind of come back to it as like, why can't meditation be more like the daily cup of coffee type of thing, right? Where it's like, it's not necessarily something it's there if you need it, if you do have something that is an issue that needs dealing with. But it's also equally, if not more effective, as something that is just a common practice to just, I think in some ways, like we mentioned your husband doing it, like just something to incrementally improve your wellness just as is. Like it doesn't, you don't necessarily need to work from a deficit.
Yeah.
It can be something that just builds as a surplus almost, right? And then I think that comes in handy because down the road, it's a reserve that you've built up if and when something happens to kind of try to knock you off center. And I think, for me, all those things coming together facilitates, hopefully something like Whitespace to be a tool for that, right? Which is like, I can come to it, I can use it on a daily basis when I need it, in my context, in the moment I need it, what have you, in my schedule, like whatever I'm running around. And hopefully it becomes like kind of that practice that people can incorporate like more actively in their lives, right? Because I think, again, I don't know why it keeps coming in my head, but like the whole, like the Starbucks thing, like I don't know if people have read the story about Howard Schultz and like how he thought about Starbucks, but like his whole thing was like he went to Italy and he saw a cafe and he like the phrase third place, you have home and you have work, and then in Europe you have the cafe, which is the third place, which is like a central part of people's lives. And then he thought about in the States, like people don't have that. And so that's why he was like one of his like foundational principles, like I want to create a place that's just comfortable and it's like the third place. And he's like ended up doing pretty well, like doing that. And so that's, in some ways, that's kind of how I think about Whitespace is like, I feel like that third place for your like, your inner, like goings on or whatever. In a lot of ways, it's like missing in like kind of predominant like mainstream life.
Like people exercise for physical wealth, physical health, right?
It's funny you mention that because that same guy, James Bashara, he literally like put a list down in terms of like how he thinks about health, and he was like literally 5 things. He was like, sleep is number 1, diet is number 2, exercise is number 3, stress management is number 4, and then 5th, obviously he's selling his caffeine thing, was like supplements. So it was like in that order. And I was like, I don't disagree with that, but I actually think in a lot of ways, some people might put meditation under stress management, but I actually think it encompasses maybe all of those things.
All of those things. It's active management, right, of your...
Exactly. And if you look at the counter side of it, is like, if you didn't have mental wealth or mental wellness or whatnot, it inhibits all of the previous things. You can't sleep well.
Yep.
You have more
stress.
You stress eat,
Yep.
impact your diet. You don't have motivation to exercise. Like so.
Yep.
So I think in some ways I would almost like flip it on its head, where it's like meditation is potentially a way to activate like all 4 or 5 of those. Four. I don't know if you want to have supplements or not, but like the 4 critical sides of those things. Yeah, again, it's like a kind of a little bit of a paradigm shift.
Awesome. So, has it improved your pickup basketball?
The funny thing is, when I started listening to my own meditations, I had an amazing game, and then I tore my calf muscle
Okay.
that same game.
So you had to rest.
So it was like, yeah, I was like, this is work. I was like, oh no. I was like, and then I was like limping off the court. But all's well that ends well, because then I was like, you know what? I was like, I can use this for healing meditations. So I ended up actually creating some meditations, like visualizing and I had to actually look this up. I was like, how the heck does the muscle actually heal itself? And it's like crazy what the body does. It like literally stitches itself together. So I did some meditations, like imagining these little guys like doing their work, and like, again, cause and effect is hard to figure out, but like I ended up healing like relatively quickly. Like, 2 or 3 weeks later, I was like walking around. Actually, within like 48 hours, I went from like not being able to walk, like 48 hours I was able to at least put weight on it and do things like that. So yeah, anyhow, it remains to be seen. I feel like I've gotten marginally better, but yeah, I'm not.
We'll check back in on that maybe in a couple of months.
I'm not showing up on any kids posters. I'll put it that way.